So yeah, I'm hoping that this topic is going to be relevant for
Oh,
the whole
it's
series
perfect.
because it is related to religion and it
Mm-hmm,
is related to one of the two time periods that we are
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
focused.
Yeah,
So
it's all good. It's all good.
and it's interesting, I think,
Mm-hmm.
for anybody
Yeah.
who's interested in religion.
Mm-hmm. We had people talking about Augustine, so Christian philosophers. We had uh, people talking about uh, 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 Epicurean philosophy.
Mm.
Uh, and I don't think uh, if we had Stoics, now I'm wondering, I don't think we had Stoics as a topic, but skeptics, definitely not. So, so yeah, and it fits perfectly, so it's fine.
Yeah, well, as you know, I was thinking about talking about Galen, but I noticed somebody already talked about
Yeah,
Yeah,
Galen.
we have
David
Galen. Yeah.
Dusenberry talked about
Right.
a little bit about Galen. Yeah,
Yeah.
mostly about
So
Nemesius and uh, Galen's medicine, the way Galen's medicine played in his philosophy. So yeah, but this one is even better because nobody really talked about skepticism.
yeah, that's what I was thinking also.
Mm,
Might be more interesting to cover more ground.
yeah.
So maybe we can start.
We can start. Yeah, it's 7:05. I think uh, we can start. Okay, so I'm really happy to announce our today's speaker. It's Professor Pavle Stojanović. He's teaching here at the University of Belgrade, Faculty of Philosophy. His research area is mostly philosophy of Hellenistic period. And today, Pavle is going to talk about uh, skepticism as a virtue. And here it is. Zoom is yours, Pavle. Take it
Thank
from
you very
here.
much. Yeah. All right. So the topic of my talk today, as you can see on your screens, hopefully, is can a skeptic be pious and should he be? And the focus is going to be on a particular brand of or type of skepticism, namely ancient Pyrrhonism. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what ancient Pyrrhonism is, and then set out a problem here, which is related to the skeptic's piety. So let's dive in. So first, let's say a few words about Pyrrhonian skepticism. Maybe some of you already have some previous knowledge about it. But just in case somebody is not really familiar with it, it will be useful to lay out some foundations so that you can understand what this interesting problem is all about, and then how the skeptics perhaps are able to solve it. So many schools and philosophers in ancient philosophy obviously can be considered skeptical, at least in some sense. But if we take one of the defining features of skepticism to be universal doubt, then, or in other words, suspension of belief about everything, then arguably the first philosopher and the first school to explicitly advocate this position was Arcesilaus, the leader of the so-called Middle Academy in the 3rd century BCE. Middle Academy, of course, here refers to Plato's Academy or Platonic Academy after the death of Plato. It may be a little bit surprising, perhaps, that Platonic Academy went full skeptical, but indeed that is what happened. Although we have to bear in mind that they didn't use the word skeptic for themselves. They always called themselves the academics. So this method that Arcesilaus was the first to advocate was later adopted um, and developed further by the so-called Pyrrhonists. starting with Anicedemus in the 1st century BC and concluding with Sextus Empiricus, who probably lived in the 2nd century CE. We don't really know exactly the date for Sextus's life, so this is more of a conjecture based on some of the things that he does or doesn't mention in his works. Now, the Pyrrhonists, they made 2 chief additions to what Arcesilaus devised as what I just called the first self-aware skeptical method, but self-aware without the actual name, right? Without the calling themselves the skeptics. The first addition is that the Pyrrhonists explicitly distance themselves from negative dogmatism. Negative dogmatism, of course, being the claim, a positive claim that knowledge is unattainable or impossible. Instead of this, the Pyrrhonists focused on continuous examination of everything. And that is actually the reason why they call themselves skeptikoi, from the Greek verb skeptestai, to investigate. The second addition was to set freedom from mental disturbance as the ultimate aim of skeptical philosophy. And this second thing is actually going to play a major role in our today's discussion, as you will see. So let me first say a few words about the basics of Pyrrhonism, what this philosophy is all about, how it's supposed to work, and that will help us later understand where piety and religion fits into this whole picture, which probably is kind of surprising to hear that a skeptic would have any kind of position on religion other than an atheist position, right? That would be something that we would expect. So the skeptic begins by noticing that in respect to everything, both in terms of ordinary life, as well as in the context of philosophy and science, there are mutually exclusive oppositions between various appearances and explanations. For instance, the same tower appears round from a distance, but square from up close. Or in some cultures, adultery is considered wrong, while in others it is permissible. Or some philosophers argue that the soul is immortal, others argue that the soul is mortal, and so on and so on. And if you look at Sextus's works, they are full with all manner of examples such as these, which are there to illustrate all these different disagreements between different philosophers, philosophical schools, but also disagreements between even observations of ordinary people, like this first example about the tower appearing different from a distance and different from up close. After careful consideration, the skeptic realizes that all these opposing appearances and explanations are equally persuasive, at least to his mind, of course, and that he is unable to rationally accept some of these and reject others. Because of this, he suspends belief about the real nature of things. So the skeptic does not reject appearances. The skeptic acknowledges that certain things appear to him a certain way, but what he suspends belief about is how things are in their real nature. Finally, the skeptic discovers that this suspension of belief has resulted in ataraxia, which is tranquility or freedom from unavoidable mental disturbance. And indeed, Sextus tells us that this is the official goal of Pyrrhonian skepticism. Pyrrhonians engage in this whole ordeal of skeptical method precisely hoping that they will achieve this end result. So the whole project really has a very practical dimension. The goal is to help yourself. If you are a successful skeptic, or if you're a person who successfully engages in skeptical type of thinking, you will ideally be able to help yourself live better by removing the unnecessary disturbances from your mind. And this, again, as I said at the beginning, is really going to be very important for the rest of our discussion. So I'm going to clarify a little bit what Sextus has to say about tranquility, or about ataraxia. So in short, you have here this kind of a sequence to give you the idea about the skeptic's journey, intellectual journey, or process, maybe is a better expression. So you have oppositions, they are equally persuasive, they're mutually exclusive, but equally persuasive. You arrive at suspension of belief, and that leads to tranquility, or peace of mind, if you wish. So what exactly is the skeptic's ataraxia, and how exactly is that supposed to work? I mean, why is it something desirable? Well, here's what Sextus has to say about this in his general work, Outlines of Pyrrhonism, in book 1. He says, we do not take the skeptics to be undisturbed in every way. We say that they are disturbed by things which are forced upon them. For we agree that at times they shiver and are thirsty and have other feelings of this kind. But in these cases, ordinary people, meaning non-skeptics, are afflicted by two sets of circumstances, by the affections themselves, and no less by believing that these circumstances are bad by nature. Then Sextus continues, for those who hold the belief that things are good or bad by nature are perpetually troubled. When they lack what they believe to be good, they take themselves to be persecuted by natural evils, and they pursue what, so they think, is good. And when they have acquired these things, they experience more troubles, for they are elated beyond reason and measure, and in fear of change, they do anything so as not to lose what they believe to be good. The skeptics, on the other hand, who shed the additional belief that each of these things is bad in its nature, come off more moderately even in these cases. So in other words, the skeptic is not somebody who would deny that they are experiencing things, mentally disturbing things, which they cannot, or nobody can avoid. I mean, if the skeptic is hungry, or if you stab him, with a knife, he will not say, oh no, I'm fine, I don't feel anything. It's perfectly, I have no idea what's going on. Maybe I'm being stabbed, maybe I'm not being stabbed, I can't decide. That's not the purpose or the point that that Sextus is making. Rather, what he's trying to say is, there are certain things, certain affections that none of us can avoid, but those that we can avoid, we apply our skeptical method to them so that we can eliminate these beliefs, additional unnecessary beliefs, which cause additional mental disturbance. So in essence, ataraxia is not some kind of a complete, total state of apathy, in the sense of not being affected by anything. According to Sextus, that would be unrealistic as a goal, but rather it is a method to eliminate all beliefs that could cause you mental trouble or that can upset you, that you can eliminate. And in that sense, the skeptic supposedly is better off, has a better life than members of all other philosophical schools, and of course, as well, regular people who are not engaged in philosophy. All right, so that's the general description, very short, of course, of what Pyrrhonism is and how it's supposed to work, and what is its what is the benefit of being a skeptic. Now, let's look at the problem that we are going to talk about specifically in this discussion. So, if the skeptic truly suspends belief about everything, then one would expect the skeptic to be rather disinterested in taking any kind of position towards piety. Or at least we would expect him to be equally disposed both towards affirming as well as towards denying the existence of gods, and also towards engaging in as well as ignoring the religious observances and rituals. But this is not the picture that we get from Sextus's works. In fact, Sextus is quite explicit in describing the skeptic as someone who will say that gods exist, and someone who will engage in religious rituals and practices of the community in which he lives. And this, as I said, is a rather unexpected result, because it somehow seems natural that if you suspend judgment about gods and everything related to their nature, it seems somehow logical that you would completely be disinterested in anything that has to do with religion. So I think we can ask two questions here in relation to this unexpected situation. First, can the skeptic do this without betraying his skepticism? Can the skeptic engage in pious practices, pious behavior? Can he say all these things, that gods exist, that they are providential, and so on, without somehow being accused of giving up on his skepticism? And the second question is, why would the skeptic do this? What's the motivation for this sort of seemingly odd behavior? So let's look at some key texts where Sextus does talk about skeptical piety, quote unquote, just to get a better picture of what we are dealing with here. So in book 1 of his work, Outlines of Pyrrhonism, Sextus provides a general account of how the skeptics are supposed to conduct their lives. And he says, holding to that which appears, we live without beliefs, in accordance with the observations pertaining to life. For we are incapable of being completely inactive. These observations pertaining to life seem to be fourfold, consisting in the guidance of nature, the necessitation of affections, the tradition of laws and customs, and in the instruction in crafts. And then he goes on to explain each of these four. In accordance with the guidance of nature, we naturally are those who perceive and think. In accordance with the necessitation of affections, hunger leads us to food, thirst to drink. In accordance with the tradition of customs and laws, we receive from life the view of piety as good and impiety as bad. In accordance with instruction in crafts, we are not inactive in those crafts which we have received. And all this we say in a manner devoid of beliefs. So it is in this second paragraph that you really get some sort of a closer idea what Sextus thinks the skeptic's life would look like. Now, I have underlined this part about piety because that is the focus of our attention today. But as you can see here, all these things that Sextus mentions we are supposed to understand them as belonging somehow to those passive experiences that we receive from our environment, which Sextus says earlier are the ones that are unavoidable. So, if you're brought up in so first of all, if you are a human being, you naturally are disposed to perceive and think, right? If you don't do this, if you don't have this ability, then you're not really a human being. So it will be ridiculous, even according to Sextus, to deny that we humans and they, as skeptics, somehow do not perceive or think. The stuff about hunger leading to food, thirst leading to drink, that's rather obvious. And the fourth thing that is about the skeptic being someone who also can have a profession, right? So the skeptic is not somebody who will just sit and do nothing because he suspends judgment about everything. Instead, because he has been brought up in particular circumstances, went to school or learned some kind of trade, perhaps before he became a skeptic, he will just continue doing whatever that craft or whatever this education has given the skeptic. But the point is that he can do this, according to Sextus, without jeopardizing his skepticism. Now, of course, the main thing that we're interested in is piety. And piety is supposed to be the result of the influence of tradition and customs and laws that each of us is brought up in. So if you're brought up in a society, in a community that is religious, from childhood, you would be kind of taught to do certain religious rituals, to observe certain customs, to say certain things, and so on. And a skeptic would not be somebody who would say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore because now I suspend judgment about the existence of God. The second key text is appears closer to the beginning of book 3 of the same work, deals where Sextus deals with the views of dogmatic, as he calls them. These are just non-skeptical philosophers, their views on physics and ethics. And he says, since the majority of philosophers have asserted that God is the most active cause, let us first investigate views about God, remarking by way of preface that following life in a manner devoid of beliefs, we say that there are gods and we are pious towards gods, and we say that they are provident, while it is against the rashness of the dogmatists that we make the following points. And then he proceeds to offer a relatively short summary of the positions and arguments of various schools on the nature of gods. And in the end of this section, he concludes that it is incomprehensible whether or not there are gods. In other words, it's the typical skeptical conclusion. The arguments both for and against the existence of gods are equally strong for the skeptic, and hence he suspends judgments on in this respect. Finally, the third text, and I promise I'm not going to bother you anymore with the texts, appears in another work by Sextus Empiricus against the physicists, where he tackles the arguments of the dogmatists on gods in much more detail than in the previous work, but he arrives at the same conclusion. This is what he says. Since not everything that is conceived also shares in reality, but something can be conceived but not be real, like a hippocentaur or Scylla, it will be necessary after our investigation of the conception of the gods to inquire also into their reality. For perhaps the skeptic will be found to be safer than those who do philosophy in another way. In line with his ancestral customs and laws, he says that there are gods and does everything that tends to worship of and reverence towards them. But as far as philosophical investigation is concerned, he, the skeptic, makes no rash moves. Of those who have inquired into the reality of God, then, some say that there is a God, some say that there is not, and some that there no more is than is not a God. Most of the dogmatists and the common preconception of life, meaning the ordinary people and how they conceive of this, say that there is a God. Those labeled atheists say that there is not a God. And the skeptics said that there no more are than are not gods because of the equal strength of the opposing arguments. So as you can see, throughout all these texts, he sticks to his basic ideas. Suspension of judgment because of the equal strength of opposing appearances and arguments. And he doesn't really mention ataraxia a lot. And that is something that I think is missing from this picture in the text, but is actually crucial to understand why skeptic thinks all this. But we'll get to that in a minute. First, let us just briefly address some of the previous attempts of addressing the problem that I have outlined a few slides ago. I mean, I call them failed attempts because I think that they are failed, but of course, you can take that with a big grain of salt if you wish. One approach proposed by Julia Annas is to try to understand the skeptic through the lens of the distinction between teleological beliefs, which are the purview of philosophers, and religious beliefs, which are the foundation of religious practices of the ordinary people. This is an interesting proposal, does have some similarities with some of the later approaches like the Fides tradition. Perhaps you can find something similar in Wittgenstein as well. And it is one way to try to understand this whole situation with skeptics' unexpected piety. And of course, some reasons independently from this whole discussion about the nature of ancient religions and their difference compared to Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, do seem to support or at least make possible this sort of a distinction. So according to this interpretation, in the context of Greek culture and Greek religion, religious views are autonomous from the theological ones. Right? Theological ones being, do gods exist? And if they do, what kind of properties they have? While the religious beliefs would be, those that ordinary people have, like, well, I should sacrifice to God because I want to avoid being punished by God or having some kind of disfavor and so on. The idea is that ordinary people don't really care too much about these highly theoretical, theological problems and ideas and theories. Now, the issue with this approach, why I think it's wrong, I mean, I'm not the only one who thinks this is wrong, is that textual evidence does not really support the claim that the Pyrrhonists made this distinction or that they used it or relied on it. On the contrary, their skeptical arguments seem to be aimed indiscriminately against both the beliefs about gods held by philosophers as well as those held by ordinary people. So, there are places in the text where Sextus actually, does his job of applying the skeptical method to the different arguments offered by different philosophical schools. And then he adds, but also ordinary people have no idea what they're talking about when they're talking about gods. Another approach to solving this problem focuses on Sextus' claim that the skeptic's position on piety makes him safer. And we have seen in one of the texts that indeed that is what Sextus says. He says that the skeptic is safer than other philosophers, members of other philosophical schools, because of the way he approaches piety. Now, this can be understood either in the sense of A, protecting himself from possibly being ostracized or even persecuted by members of his community for disbelieving in gods, or it can be understood in the sense of B, avoiding a possible divine disapproval or even punishment for disregarding religious rituals, something similar to Pascal's wager. Now, the issue with the first option is that it's difficult to see how this strategy would work, given that Sextus publicly announces in his writings that the skeptic doesn't actually believe in God. Right? So in order for option A to work, the skeptics would have to hide this from other people. They shouldn't be going around writing in their books that they have this kind of a secret trick where they're just going to pretend that they're pious, but actually they don't believe in gods. Because then, people would just say, well, here's an atheist who just pretends to believe in God, so let's, burn the witch. On the other hand, option B also seems ineffective insofar as gods expect those who perform religious rituals to actually hold corresponding religious beliefs and not just to go through the external motions, right? Presumably, gods, if you try to fool them by just pretending that you're religious without actually believing in their existence, benevolence, and so on, presumably gods would be able to figure it out. And if they can figure it out, then it will not, going through the external motions would not really save you from the anger of the gods. So this approach also doesn't seem to be very promising. So I'm going to propose my own sort of interpretation and solution to this problem. And remember, I have said at the beginning, when defining the problem, that there's two aspects to it. The first, can the skeptic actually be pious without jeopardizing his skepticism? And the second one was the question of motivation. Why would skeptic do all this? So let's address the first point first, how the skeptic can consistently act piously. Well, I want to propose rather straightforwardly that it is perfectly possible for one to engage in pious behavior and practices without holding any pious beliefs whatsoever. Can one, for example, say Merry Christmas, or attend a mass in the church, or sing in a church choir without believing that Christian God exists? I believe that, yes, one can. I mean, I'm not saying everybody would be equally capable of doing this. People would differ in respect to this, but there's nothing obviously impossible about doing something like this. In fact, many people actually probably do this as a matter of fact. And in fact, we can compare this to something similar, but in a different realm, in the realm of ethics. One can also, for instance, be faithful to his wife without holding the belief that adultery is morally wrong. It's perfectly fine to engage in certain actions and in certain behavior without actually holding beliefs that underpin this sort of behavior. So I see no reason to think that saying pious things, like gods exist, or even acting piously necessarily presupposes holding beliefs with pious content. Now, of course, I am underlining this here because I think there's a potential interesting question that we can ask further. Could holding certain other beliefs still be necessary, right? Because if the skeptic can say Merry Christmas without believing in the existence of God, maybe he has to have certain other beliefs. For instance, that it's, bad to offend your fellow community members, right? So even if you can engage in religious behavior without having religious beliefs, perhaps you still have to have some other kinds of beliefs in order to do this. Now, I'm not going to get into this tangent here, but if this is the case, if you do still need some kind of beliefs, maybe not religious ones, but certain others, in order to be able to do all this, then the issue would not be really here the skeptic's piety, but a more broader problem of whether the skeptic can live at all without holding at least some beliefs. This is, by the way, a very sort of broadly discussed and often discussed problem among contemporary scholars, whether skepticism is livable at all. And in fact, it was one of the problems that was raised against the Pyrrhonists themselves already back in the day. So that's my answer to the first part of the problem. Can the skeptic engage in pious behavior without believing in God? Yes, right. So you can perfectly be someone who suspends belief on all religious matters, but still on the outside, say things such as, God is great, Merry Christmas, Happy Easter, or whatever, go to church, do certain things, no problem there, I think. Of course, you're welcome to push me on this if you disagree. But let's address the second problem, the second part of the problem, which I think, I admit, is more interesting and more difficult than the former. So we have seen that the skeptic's ultimate aim is ataraxia, being mentally tranquil and unaffected by anything except the unavoidable necessary things. Although Sextus never explicitly says that the purpose of his pious behavior is related to achieving and maintaining ataraxia, herein may in fact lie the solution to the puzzle of his motivation, in my view. Namely, saying that gods exist and engaging in religious rituals observed by the community in which he lives could actually help the skeptic avoid unnecessary disturbances that come from unnecessary beliefs. So let's see how. First, I want to emphasize that I do not only mean here the external disturbances that may arise from disregarding religious customs of his community. We have seen previously that the skeptic doesn't seem too concerned about these external problems of faking his piety. What I primarily mean here is eliminating the effect of holding beliefs that may be involved in actively avoiding pious behavior that is common in his community. Namely, recall that the skeptic acquiesces to things that arise from his life's experience. If he has been brought up in a culture in which most people believe that gods exist and actively display this belief through religious rituals, he would be predisposed, habituated, even maybe trained in some way to behave like this, to behave piously, to behave as though he believes in God. So breaking this habit, going against this training, would arguably require believing that there are strong reasons to do so. And these are precisely the sort of beliefs that can unnecessarily upset the skeptic and jeopardize his ataraxia. So let me give you an example so I can better illustrate what I'm talking about. If I have been brought up from childhood in a Christian family that places great care and effort in organizing a celebratory family dinner each Christmas or Easter, deciding to break this ritual that I've grown accustomed to over the years would require me to accept and act on a belief to the effect that since I find reasons for the existence and non-existence of Christian God to be of equal strength, I should no longer participate in these festivities. On the contrary, it seems that passively continuing to participate and going through all the motions, even though I suspend my belief in the existence or non-existence of the Christian God, would be more in accordance with my skeptical indifference than taking active steps to disengage from this established practice. So the motivation for the skeptic to act piously in the context of a pious community is the fact that it contributes to his ataraxia more than acting impiously. And that, I think, is the solution to the problem. So can the skeptic be pious without jeopardizing his skepticism? Yes, because you can do and say things without believing them, no problem there. But why would the skeptic do this? Well, precisely because it contributes to his ataraxia, because going against the customs and rituals of the community he has grown up in, which is presumably one that's religious, would actually require the skeptic to have certain non-necessary beliefs that would be against his tranquility, that would actually be something that is susceptible to suspension of judgment, suspension of belief. So perhaps Sextus' appeal to safety should in fact be interpreted along these lines. We're not talking about some external safety, in the sense of security from persecution, but intellectual safety, right? So his ataraxia is actually safer if the skeptic is pious, presumably because he grew up in a culture that is religious, of course. If the skeptic grows up in a culture that is not by default religious, then all this, of course, would not be an issue. All right, so that's the main point. So I just have a couple of more things to say by way of resolution. There are two objections left to address that are commonly raised against the skeptic's piety that I've been talking about. The first one is the objection of insincerity. Namely, if the skeptic acts piously but suspends judgments and beliefs about gods, then his behavior is at best not honest and at worst even deceitful. So that some philosophers, some scholars believe is somehow a problem. I'm not really convinced that this is a big problem, but let me address it anyway. So first, the skeptic does not really seem to be deceitful because his motivation for acting piously, as I've argued, is not to intentionally trick others into thinking that he truly believes in gods and to benefit from this deception, but his motivation is to save himself from unnecessary mental disturbance. Now, if someone gets deceived in the process, that's just collateral damage, the expression that I like to use because our friends in the West like it very much. Is the skeptic at least dishonest then? Right, so he's not deceitful, but maybe he's dishonest. Well, that depends. If we assume that one ought not to utter religious claims and engage in religious practice unless one holds certain religious beliefs, then perhaps we could say that the skeptic is dishonest. But the thing is that the skeptic doesn't have to accept and abide by this assumption. In fact, endorsing such an ethical claim that one ought not to utter religious things and engage in religious practices unless one holds certain religious beliefs. That would arguably constitute a deviation from skeptics' skeptical stance. So insincerity, in my view, not a big issue here, not a big problem. What about the second objection? The second objection is the objection of conformism. If the skeptic's method leads him to always obey the existing laws and customs of his community, even when they are, for whatever reason, problematic, then he is merely a conformist, a pathetic yes man. And somehow, presumably, this is problematic. Well, I think that this implication can hardly be denied. The skeptic's approach, which takes ataraxia as the only ultimate life goal, does indeed make him a staunch anti-reformist and anti-revolutionary. And the skeptic is, judging by what Sextus tells us at least, perfectly content with this. In fact, he would think of this as a virtue, not as something negative. But I believe that there still might be something to this objection. And this is, of course, just my personal opinion. Namely, in his effort to avoid all unnecessary mental disturbance and attain and maintain mental tranquility, the skeptic does rid himself of the potential pleasures and excitements experienced by reformists or revolutionaries. And insofar as there may be some important value in these excitements and pleasures, then the skeptic is indeed pitifully deprived. But if this were the case, the issue then would not be a matter of the skeptic's inconsistency, but rather of his misguided life goals. In other words, if you set ataraxia as the ultimate goal of your life, if that's what you think your life should be and how you should live, then everything the skeptic does and everything Sextus tells us actually makes sense. It works. At least that's my view. I don't see any kind of inconsistencies there. I don't see him giving up or having to give up his skepticism at all. But that's a big if, because I think there is something to doubting, pun intended, that ataraxia actually should be the ultimate goal of one's life, because it kind of makes your life boring, to put things very simply. So that's it. That's the all I wanted to say today. And of course, I would welcome your questions and discussion. Hopefully, this was an interesting topic for you, not just philosophically, but also personally. So let's talk about it.
Thank you, Pavle, for the very interesting and informative lecture. And I would like to open the discussion. So any questions? Anybody? Let me just check whether somebody raised their hands.
Kyle raised his hand.
Yeah. Go
Sorry,
ahead,
I
Kyle.
can't find the raise hand thing
Option.
in my
It doesn't
Zoom
matter.
interface.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say thanks. The talk was great. I think you're basically right about all the solutions to the problems and stuff. I just wanted to see what you thought about this. So one of your, I can't remember if it was your second or third solution to the main problems that you raised that you wanted to resolve. But you were talking about why a skeptic would want to adhere to customs, and it's because it's more likely to secure ataraxia for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only thing that I would say there is you could kind of keep the strength and correctness of the point while making it even sort of weaker and harder to object to, in the sense that the skeptic doesn't need to have like a want or a desire or a belief in ataraxia per se. they might already be predisposed to go after that in the same way that they'd be habituated to want to eat tasty food or habituated to want to see a good friend. They would then be habituated to want to engage in religious practice. Does that make sense?
If I understood, you wanted to say that we don't have to ascribe to the skeptic some kind of a positive position on the value of ataraxia, right?
Yeah, he doesn't have to have ataraxia in mind when he participates in religious customs.
Right. So this sort of behavior could just be something that he noticed through living experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I mean, it does remind me of what Sextus says at the beginning of Outlines of Pyrrhonism when he's describing how ataraxia actually follows from suspension of judgment. He never says it follows as some kind of a logical conclusion or something like that. He says it follows as if by accident.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of in vogue with your comment and suggestion there. But thanks.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree.
Hey, thank you. Any more questions? Peter, if you see somebody who wants to speak, please let me know because I don't have the overview here of everybody who are present. So I'm kind of scrolling back and forth, trying to locate whether somebody raised their hands. Okay, if not, I do
Can I
have
ask
some...
Can I ask a question? Put a question to the audience.
Of course.
I know it's a little unusual, but I think it's interesting. Did any of you, and of course you're welcome not to say that, ever engage in a practice such as this one, right? So saying Merry Christmas or Happy Easter or something without actually believing in all that comes with that. And if so, I'm interested in, what was your kind of impression about all this?
I mean, we all do all these things many times without. Well, we are saying to people when we are in a bad mood, we say not just religious things. We do ordinary things without being really in the mood for them and not believing in them. So nice to meet you can not be so nice, but we still say it, right? Because it's a proper way to. And it's a way to maintain social cohesion and not to get in fights and be decent human being. So yeah, so we do other things as well. As for Merry Christmas, well, it depends on like if I have to answer with my personal experience. Well, it depends on my state of my life. There was a period when I did not believe in God, and I would say these things without meaning it. To people who are religious, right? So yeah, and that's because you want to be a decent human being in your community, right? So yeah, but I wanted to say something about the safe, to be on the safe side for the skeptic. The argument that you mentioned that, well, it was from one of the texts where he says that unlike all these philosophers who debated the nature of gods and the beliefs of in gods, and the skeptic is actually on the safer side there, something like that. And then, yeah.
It's on the screen, actually. I put it on the screen.
Oh, okay. Okay. But what comes to my mind is that so first I have one question for you, and that's whether anywhere in the texts of skeptics you found the disbelief in gods, like as a atheism as a position stated, like explicitly, like there are no gods, or there is this belief that there are no gods, and or something like that. I'm wondering, it's not rhetorical question, no trap here. It's just I'm wondering because there is one wonderful book by Peter Harrison that we talked about here in the here as a part of this project. Occasionally, I kept mentioning the book. He writes the story about how religion, as we know it today, developed out of something that was not really, strictly speaking, the belief initially, when it comes to the Greek religion, Roman religion, or early Christianity, up until Thomas Aquinas, basically, and the religion was more as the capacity of the soul. Not like a doctrine that you kind of dispute over there. And when they disputed the things that now appear to us as the part of the doctrine, they were not really interested in whether God was such and such or such and such. They were interested in the way we honor God, whether we praise gods or God in monotheistic religion properly or not. So they said, well, pagans, they had the sense of gods. They believe in gods, but they honor them in the wrong way. There is this one God, and you should honor him in this particular way. So what I had in mind when you were talking was that maybe for the skeptics was actually a very good way not to state any belief about the nature of gods. And that's why, to be on the safe side, well, I'm going to honor God the way my community does. And this is somehow going around the beliefs, particular beliefs. I don't care. These people are actually not on the safe side, who debate the nature of gods. I don't know the nature. I'm going to honor them in this practice, the way my community does. So that was my thought. And then to go back to Thomas Aquinas and some more closer to us arguments, the claim is that, for example, these 5 arguments for God's existence of Thomas Aquinas, they are not really arguments for God's existence. We all know that God exists. They are developed so that we can distinguish our concept of God from Islam. So Christianity is kind of better kind of doctrine, but nobody actually disbelieves in God or is the atheist for real. So anyway, so these are my thoughts. Sorry for just like the thoughts that were keep popping to my mind while you're talking, and I really found the whole thing actually convincing. Yes, skeptic can be pious, because he can actually skip the belief part. He can go to the ritual part and hope and open himself to kind of, to some religious experience that is not part of the belief, but part of the practice. Something like that. I don't know. Some thoughts. Sorry. I don't really have a question. These are just comments.
No, well, comments are fine. I mean, of course, that they are as valuable as questions. So, I mean, you raised several different points here, and I'm not sure if I remember all of them.
No, of course. Yeah.
So, your first question was, do skeptics ever say in their writings that they don't believe in God? I think that was the first.
Yeah. Whether they ever is there the existence of God actually in question, or the nature of the God? Because the nature of the God, they can actually say, I don't know, I don't care. But whether gods exist or not, yeah.
That's an interesting question, and here's why. I think it's interesting because one thing that ancient skeptics never really question is the existence of the external world.
Yeah, I know that. That
is a one of the big differences between ancient skepticism and modern skepticism.
Yeah.
And even in the text, you can find explicitly a sentence or more than one place saying, nobody actually, doubts that external things exist. What we are kind of all fighting about is how they are in their nature. Now, I think that you meant something like that. You want to draw a parallel
That's
with
exactly
with
whether
God.
there is this parallel to God as
Yeah,
well.
I
Yeah,
understand.
or gods. I mean,
Um,
gods.
I think that in the text, actually, the situation is different when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
God, because there are many places where Sextus says, we suspend judgment on whether or not God
Or not.
exists.
Okay,
So
that's a different one. Okay.
yeah, so that's a different.
Mhm.
He doesn't really. It's. I think it puts it on a different level
Yeah,
compared
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
the issue of the existence of the external world.
Okay.
So I would say they are more. How would you say? More skeptical.
No, no, no,
Not
no,
that they
no,
are
yeah, that's
about
what I
the
wanted to know. Yeah,
external
yeah.
world.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, a couple of other things. You mentioned can the skeptic's approach
Mhm.
open his mind and soul up
Mhm.
to,
So, yeah,
some positive religious experience or
yeah.
something like that.
Experience that is not like a belief, exhausted in the belief in God's
Right.
existence or nature of God, but it just religious experience that we cannot really put into words or beliefs, something like that.
That actually is a very relevant question for this particular topic,
Mhm.
because some of the authors modern scholars who wrote about
Mhm.
this, I think Harald Thorsrud
Mhm.
was one of them, who kind of ends up with the same conclusion
Okay.
in his paper where he deals with this topic. And I think that's kind of his point. His point is,
Mhm.
precisely because the skeptic suspends judgment about all these theological matters, he's
Mhm.
actually more open to having some kind of a positive religious experience
Yeah.
compared to someone who would be just sort of
Yeah.
being completely indifferent.
Mhm.
If the skeptic were actually applying his idea of equal strength and total suspension of belief to his practice as well, then perhaps he would be more closed to something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, okay, neat. Okay. Well, thank you, Pavle. I think that Kyle has another question. He
Yes.
found the
Ah,
button for the
then
little
then
He
hand.
found the
Nicola found that.
button.
Yeah, found it.
Mm.
Well, to kind of answer and elaborate on the question you had fielded to us, I just wanted to say that I don't know how often I do act things out without the corresponding conviction in religious terms. I don't have that many religious folks around me right now, at least. But in terms of just ordinary norms, I mean, I think that happens all the time. And I think that connects really closely with what you were talking about, the Pyrrhonist being a conformist. One of the things that sort of has fascinated me about Pyrrhonism is I think it's got a really close connection with political conservatism. It's got a kind of natural affinity with it. And I think you can see that not just with little bits and pieces here and there in Sextus and other ancient skeptics, but it kind of comes out in full force when Pyrrhonism is reintroduced in the modern period. I think Montaigne is probably one of the best examples of that. So I just wanted to mention that, yeah, I do that all the time, and I think it's because of the almost naturally conservative effects that Pyrrhonism plus customs and norms has in a society.
Right. But then you would disagree with my kind of provocation at the very end that this kind of conservatism may actually make our lives boring.
We
I
like
think I would.
boring. Come on, we love boring. Like
I
it's
might.
just
I'm not yet that old, okay?
I might have to just suspend judgment on that one.
Okay, all right. Good.
I
Thank
think
you.
Nicola raised his hand. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to ask a further question in regards of the question Professor Stojanović raised. So if we say, if we try to rather generalize this method of achieving the maximum ataraxia possible, couldn't we then say that a Pyrrhonist should suspend even researching or asking the questions themselves and sort of abandoning philosophy completely?
Interesting question. I'm not sure why you would think this, because, I mean, at least Sextus insists on this, but we don't have to take, we don't have to accept it, but he insists all the time throughout all his works that suspension of belief is the result of investigation. Because without investigation,
Mhm.
not only why, right, what would the reason to suspend judgment, but I think we can also ask how, psychologically, would you bring yourself into that state of mind to suspend judgment. I mean, of course, some people may naturally be, you know, born or developed in such a way not to be interested in anything, you know, completely indifferent towards any kind of reflection on anything. But as Sextus says in his works, he says, we, the skeptics, as many other talented people, meaning people, you know, interested in philosophy and philosophical questions, have been troubled by all the disagreements and, you know, all these kind of never-ending debates that we have in philosophy. And then we discovered that after these thorough analysis of arguments, we reach suspension of belief, and then by accident, as it were, we come into this interesting state, mental state of ataraxia. So I don't know. I mean, for Sextus, as the way he presents these things, suspension of judgment and tranquility of the mind are always the result of investigation. But now I'm curious why and how you would think one could achieve these results without, or by giving up philosophical discussions and investigations completely.
Because as I understood your argument, you basically claimed that in order to achieve maximum ataraxia, we shouldn't even ask the questions about the nature of gods or whatever. So by that same principle, generalizing it as far as it would go, we could, I think, claim that then we should just stop asking questions altogether and stay on the safe side as in regards to basically everything.
Yeah, I don't think I said that, and definitely Sextus doesn't say anything similar to this. I mean, if you think about it, it would even go against the very name of a skeptic.
Exactly, that's why I had yeah. Thank
So
you.
the skeptic is actually literally translated the investigator. So maybe such a position that you're describing should be given a different name, I guess.
Yes, thank you. I thought I misunderstood something.
Yeah, some kind of a nihilist or something like that.
Exactly, yeah, thank you.
But then again, that also might be a philosophical position itself.
Kyle raised his hand, but I just wanted to make a quick note on what Nicola said or asked. The thing is with that skeptics, like other schools of philosophy in Greek or Roman period, they all aimed for this kind of happiness at the end, like happiness defined as ataraxia or eudaimonia or like some kind of good life. And the thing is that you, as we are born, we are stuck with all kinds of and raised with all kinds of wrong beliefs and wrong, like so we have to correct them, and the way to correct for our bringing the wrong worldview or what have you, we need to do philosophy. Now the skeptics, as I understood Pavle, they're advising one particular kind of good life. The Stoics will have different, and so on and so you cannot really by nature given this kind of good life, you have to struggle for it by doing philosophy. So so I just, that was my general thought. in connection to what you just said. Anyway, Kyle had something to say. Go ahead.
I just wanted to sort of comment on that general theme. I have a lot more exposure. I've already mentioned Montaigne once. I have a lot more exposure to him than I do specifically with the ancient Pyrrhonists. But one of the things that he says, which seems like it would square, because there's that anecdote about Pyrrho on the ship in the storm with the pig. And it was almost like like a model of the effect that ataraxia can have on you. But you also kind of see this in Montaigne. He talks about how almost the ideal of skepticism is to return to the model of the totally ignorant common person, which is in some sense not doing philosophy. So he gives this analogy when wheat starts growing or something, it like stands tall and proud, and then the more it grows or learns or whatever, it begins to bow over back toward the ground. It's supposed to be an analogy that the quest of philosophy ultimately culminates in the ignorance you began with from the very beginning. So I guess you can kind of think about, if you think that animals can be peaceful in effectively total ignorance, skepticism is just the way of manually bringing that about in yourself or something like that. So philosophy
to the
done
factory
properly
setting.
Pyrrhonism. What?
To the factory setting, bringing back to the factory setting.
Really.
Yeah. But the thing, but come on, animals are terrified on the ship. Like, come on, like, hasn't he seen a pig like during the earthquake or a storm? They are terrified. Just a comment. Sorry, Pavle, go ahead.
Yeah, no. What Kyle said just kind of brought into my mind this idea. So, I mean, I don't think we should forget that the Pyrrhonists, even though they call themselves the Pyrrhonists, one of the reasons is to actively disassociate themselves from the Platonic pedigree and origin. In fact, they do, I think, fall into this broader Socratic tradition, following the principle that only the examined life is kind of worth living. This idea, I mean, you can kind of see all these Hellenistic schools consciously or subconsciously accepting it and following it. And in fact, the Pyrrhonists themselves, this guy, Anisidemos, that I mentioned at the very beginning, as possibly the founder of Pyrrhonist skepticism, actually was a member of Plato's Academy during the so-called New Academy. Came a little bit later after Arcesilaus. It was still during its skeptical phase. So presumably the original Pyrrhonists were actually dissatisfied academics. They didn't really like the turn that the academy was taking at a particular point in time, which was to kind of soften the skepticism of Arcesilaus. This was during Carneades. He was the leader of the school back then. So, but nevertheless, even though they, split from the academy, it's not surprising to see that they, at least subconsciously, follow in the wake of this Socratic idea about why philosophy is valuable for the life of a human being, at least, maybe not for other creatures, and that is this aspect of examining. And I don't think the result is all that matters. Maybe the result of your philosophical examination will lead you to be equal to a pig, but now I'm echoing a little bit John Stuart Mill, but it's actually the process, how, or the reasons why you are now acting or feeling the same as a pig is what I guess makes it worthwhile for you as a human, not the actual end situation or the situation in which you end up or the state in which you end up. But, you know, there's no doubt, I think, that Pyrrhonists are actually your quintessential philosophers. I mean, even more than other members of other philosophical schools, because the Pyrrhonists, by the nature of their approach, had to be knowledgeable about not just the doctrines of their own school, you know, doctrines, quote unquote, because they didn't really have any doctrines, but they had to be familiar with the teachings of all other philosophical schools to a significant detail, so as to be able to construct their arguments, skeptical arguments. And, you know, that it's not by accident that many fragments about the pre-Socratics and about the later philosophers that we have surviving nowadays actually come from the works of Sextus Empiricus, because he mentions and he quotes so many positions, definitions, theories, arguments of everybody in the history of ancient philosophy that probably no other source does that, or at least no other source that we have. I mean, of course, Diogenes Laertius is perhaps somewhere up there in the in terms of comprehensiveness, but in terms of philosophical precision and depth, you know, nowhere near as Sextus. So if other skeptics, Pyrrhonists, were like Sextus, and we don't have any reason to doubt that they were, then they were actually, you know, not just philosophers, but probably one of the more informed or better educated philosophers compared to perhaps members of some other schools.
Okay. Okay. I think that we can now end our today's meeting. Thank you very much, Pavle. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Nicola, Peter, and everybody else who came. Our next and final talk will be in a couple of more weeks, and we stay tuned. We'll let you know when. So until soon, have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.